Now, let us go live. I'm going live, and for no apparent reason, I'm exploring my Christopher Lee voice this morning. Well, people often ask, where are you going to get your voices? This is a question that's come up many times. What will you use for the voices in your show? And I often tell people that, well,
I am going to be the voice of Asher. Good morning, Dominic. So am I going to, excuse me, speak with the voice of Asher this morning?
Or am I going to speak with the voice of Christopher Lee? A fair question, one that I may answer or defer.
Well, friends, it looks like we've made some progress since yesterday. Made a little progress. A little bit of ink and paint. I have actually, when I get up in the morning, I have a tendency to do some journaling. I do journaling, right? Sometimes I do it on paper, sometimes I do it on my laptop. But on any given morning, I will spend typically at least an hour just kind of thinking about whatever I'm thinking about that day. Today, I was thinking musical thoughts, and it was interesting. Hey, Krita, come in. The dog is barking at the window, or barking out of the window, weren't you? Krita, she's a very good dog. Anyway, it's really interesting how one topic dovetails into another. So, yesterday, we were talking about this, Refraction Studio. My family and friends are all voice actors, not they aspire to be. That's cool. That's cool. Yep, when I've talked about it here, I've often talked about the fan Futurama script I wrote, and then I typically shout out something along the lines of, "Good news, everyone!" or something like that. But I probably ought to practice my Bender. I'm not great at Bender, but I can do it if I listen to John DiMaggio. Typically, if I listen to it for a moment, I can nail it, right? And so, yeah, the voice acting thing, it's a lot of fun, you know. I talked yesterday about when my kids were growing up, we used to watch Beast Wars together, and I once had a ringtone on my phone that was a knockoff of David Kay's Megatron, saying, what did he say? Let me think about this. It was really cool. It sounded great. Whenever my phone would ring, I would hear, what was it he'd say? The first thing he would say. Oh, he would say, "This is Megatron, leader of the Predacons. You have a priority call coming through. You will not ignore it. No. Answer the call. Yes." Now, if I really want to nail David Kay's Megatron, I'll go sing along with some AC/DC for a couple minutes. Real scratchy. And that seems to just put them in the booth and shut the door. Hey, Calvin Pruitt. So anyway, hopefully this won't be too boring for you guys, because it gets into the discussion before we really dive into animation this morning is going to actually get into music, politics and religion, and how that all relates to editing video, which sounds bizarre, but actually it all relates very, very closely. So in the musical space, one of the challenges we have is the same problem we have in editing, which is to not bore people. Okay, so Mary Had a Little Lamb, one could argue, is pretty boring. But it's only boring because it's predictable. because stepwise motion like this is, our brains know what to expect. But when there are leaps in the music, it has a little more variety. So there's a device known as the 251, which you hear a lot in jazz, that it turns out is, in my view, one of the most compact and effective devices for introducing variety into music that exists. Why? Because it combines a very compact tool that can allow you to get from, in other words, the simplest musical idea is just 2 notes. Well, okay, the simplest musical idea is 1 note. So here's a middle C. Well, actually, this is middle C. Okay, that's the simplest musical idea, 1 note, which doesn't really get you very far. So generally, you say you want 2 notes. Well, you can have a leap or you can have stepwise motion. There are only 12 notes. So there's really only a couple things you can do. You can either go, if I want to get from C to D, I can do, I have to do stepwise motion. If I want to get from C to G, that's a leap. So arguably, for the purpose of discussion, we could argue that the jump to G is more unpredictable than the jump to D because our brains are wired to understand stepwise motion. In other words, this is kind of the most predictable idea there is, right? So if we're kind of inherently expecting, but instead we get, then there's a little surprise. But the question becomes, at the end of the day, a simple melody is, by definition, simple, especially if there's any repetition. And it repeats itself at all, right? So then the 251 is a really useful device to get you from any destination to any other destination, okay? So in other words, if I want to get from C to G, I can use a 251 to get there. Well, what is a 251? 251 says whatever your destination is, do 2, 5, and 1 to it. So in this case, you'd go from C, and then you'd go, well, actually, let's start this here. And then I want to get to G, so I'm going to go A, D, G. All right? And so if once you start turning that into chords, where you say, it gives you this really smooth transition from the C to the G, okay? Because you're going C, A minor, which only changes 1 note, D minor, and then it resolves to the G. And basically you can, so it effectively takes that simple idea of just 2 notes and subdivides it into, what is that? 1, 2, 4. Okay. And you can play with this, you know, a lot. But one of the interesting, as I was making my notes here, one of the interesting points about that has to do with dissonance. Believe me, this will come around to making cartoons. Trust me. Okay? It will definitely come around to making cartoons because this is really about editing. Okay? So let's ask ourselves this interesting question. What is the most dissonant music possible? Well, it's going to be 2 notes that are exactly adjacent to each other on the keyboard. So if you have a C, but you also play a C sharp at the same time, this is what you get. Ouch. Now it has its place. It's quite useful, actually. Very dissonant. An actual, just a second instead of a minor second is a little less dissonant. But why is it so dissonant? 2 notes that are really far apart are not dissonant. They're harmonious. Like this. Oh, wait. Looks like my keyboard just pooped out, so it doesn't matter. But this is very interesting to me. The notes that are the closest together are actually the most dissonant. They hurt our ears the most. And it occurred to me that maybe that suggests that in these topics, religion and politics, the things that are most onerous in terms of people's being able to get along. Obviously, in America, we have a real powerful disconnect in the political arena in terms of how people feel about things. And they get really, really, really worked up. I suggest that in that scenario, when everyone's the most worked up, it's probably you have maximum dissonance, right? Just like in music. I suggest that we think these people are very far apart, but I suggest that the truth is they're actually very, very close. If you have people on the strong left or the strong right, they both actually want the same thing. They want confidence in a secure, predictable future. Don't they? That's what everybody on the left and the right both want. They just disagree about the pathway to that end, which kind of gets back to your 251. In other words, it is recognizing what your destination is allows you to come to a harmonious conclusion, but you need to arm wrestle and duke it out over what's the pathway to the goal that we actually share. In our political discourse, of course, we're utterly incapable of experiencing a harmonious conclusion because our way of interacting is musically not very workable. So if you listen to Stravinsky, maybe you like Stravinsky, maybe you don't. If you take what Stravinsky did in the early 20th century even further by getting into Schoenberg or Webern, extremely dissonant music, the basic problem is that you have two completely different musical ideas happening at the same time. They're not taking turns. Well, that's what you see on the news with the talking heads on whatever, pick your favorite news channel, whether it's CNN or Fox or something in between or further to the right or left of either one. The basic problem is we've only got 40 seconds to make our point, and we don't take turns very well. So what we wind up with is this dissonance. Well, guess what? The thing that everybody kind of overlooks is that the dissonance is the point. Why? Because the ideas that are being debated are not the point. The point is to attract eyeballs, just like, we find a horrible accident kind of interesting, even though, that's kind of sick, right? But it is interesting because it's different. It's a surprise, like a 251 in the music can add variety, which gets rid of the predictability. So we have this balance between dissonance and harmony. And the point in the political discourse, of course, is simply to get eyeballs watching it so that they can earn advertising dollars. Nothing wrong with earning advertising dollars. That's perfectly fine. The problem is, if all of this is going on and we don't recognize that it's going on, if we don't recognize what the real common sense drivers of all that dissonance are, then it makes it enormously difficult for us to arrive at harmonious conclusions. So what we really want is a balance between harmony and dissonance, variety and predictability, and these things all working together can wind up with what you get in, say, John Williams music or something, which is usually a pretty clear path to a destination that we all can agree. The destination is boring. I mean, usually there's kind of a 2D and there's basically that 5-1 resolution that is extremely predictable. So when we say that this was a harmonious thing that we just remember experiencing, it wasn't the final note that we remember. It's the path. It's the entire progression. So how does this relate to editing? Well, one of the things that happened yesterday is that we saw ourselves being somewhat fixated on what the acting in this shot should include. Okay, because we were talking a little bit about the emotions and discussing the fact that Tianara's this one shot, we could do a lot with it. We could do a lot more with it. and I was arguing for doing less and not necessarily running the risk of insulting the audience's intelligence by either telling them something they already know or repeating something we already said. Well, there's a third danger. And the third danger is telling the audience something that you had forgotten you already planned to tell them 30 seconds later because it's already in the script and it's already in the show, which is exactly what happened here. So what we were playing around with doing in this shot actually happens here. When Tianara says, I think she says something like, but we have so much. I can't remember what she says, and it's actually not this shot, it's this one. But we have so much. And so when she says that, the emotion that happens, you know, in a balanced and appropriate time, what was interesting about it was that was already in the script, and in fact it was already in the show, and I had forgotten. So we're back here debating all the things that we could do and accomplish in this shot. And by the way, just for the record, I want to acknowledge that she's a little, you know, the look of these two shots is kind of different, and that's something I need to address. This is very crisp, but it's really probably it's going to amount to a little bit of just probably blurring the background, but we'll get to that. But the interesting thing about it was that this idea of harmony and dissonance and pacing, this is the challenge you have when you're creating a show, when you're editing. And I don't think, if all you're trying to do is create a 12-second demo animation to throw up on YouTube, then that's fine. That can be a very useful exercise. It can help you learn the tool, whether it's Blender or OpenToonz or Clip Studio Paint or whatever it is you use. Those exercises are quite useful. But if you're trying to create something, you know, like a show, something that's got a little bit wider potential audience, you know, if you do that 12-second exercise, your audience is basically other people that are using OpenToonz or Blender or whatever your tool is. That's your audience. And your audience to a degree is yourself, because you're trying to prove out for yourself that I can do this. Right? I mean, that's what we all, when we get into like animation or anything that's artsy fartsy, one of the questions we're always asking ourselves is, can I do it? Right? And so those exercises are useful. But what we're talking about is, come on, we're talking about a 24-minute cartoon. And so you cannot get fixated on one shot to the exclusion of the big picture. It's very, very dangerous to do so, because you wind up spending a lot of time doing something, you know, and what happens is it winds up getting cut out of the show, and I've done it a million times. You know, we could have added more to this shot, and then what would have happened if I hadn't caught it earlier is I would have gotten over to this shot and said, oh man, what we put in that shot a couple seconds ago was already in the show, and I forgot, because I'm just kind of moving forward and really focusing in like a magnifying glass on this one shot. Hey Valerie. So I put everything for Audacity on the F drive because it's essentially empty. It's got like 2 terabytes, and frankly we were actually running out of space on the other drives there. So over there Valerie's doing some stuff. And so anyway, so this is very important. If you want to do something bigger than a simple animation exercise, then you've got to consider the big picture and really be careful not to lose sight of it. Just for the record, the opposite solution would have been valid. I personally would argue that it would have been less strong, but it would have been valid. And the idea would have been to pack more emotion into this shot, and then when we get back over to this one, go ahead and take out her line of dialogue. Just see the pendant drop and then cut away. You could do it either way. Either way would work. But for the pacing of the story, what worked for me was to have her say the line here that conveyed her disappointment. And the reason for that is because of what comes after. So once again, you're in the same position of don't lose sight of the big picture. When she says this line, kind of quietly, she says, but we have so much. Well, the next thing is that her mom calls Balder over. And by the way, I think I'm going to work on this shot today. This shot is very old. I can do a much better job, and I want to do a much better job on it. So, especially on the mother. But the mother calls Balder over. Yes, yeah, m'lady. And she says, confine Tianara to the wagons. And so then Mel has a reaction to that. And again, this becomes a transition to Mel going, wow. Well, that's not his voice. He'd be more like, wow. Oh, well. He's going to say, oh, well. And then he takes off, slips on a banana peel. And then we have this whole another thing where we transition from this kind of tender or dissonant moment emotionally into some lighthearted comedy. And again, that's just part of the pacing. It's like music. You have stuff that's predictable interspersed with stuff that is unpredictable, stuff that's harmonious balanced against stuff that's dissonant. And then so you provide tension and then you provide release. And you can accomplish all that in one single shot of animation in 12 seconds. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. But for me, I have to keep sight of the bigger picture. So anyway, I thought that was all very interesting, don't you? Well, back to work. What have we actually done? Well, since I did the pencil test that you guys remember from yesterday, if you were here, I did do some ink and paint in the meantime. And I feel pretty good about the way things are going. Pretty good. There's a bit more ink and paint to do. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get in there and do some ink and paint. Pretty cool, huh? I saved it as an MP3 for you. Just talking to my beautiful wife. My beautiful, beautiful wife. I do love her with all my heart. I love her with all my heart. I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. Well, now we're back to the Christopher Lee voice, if we want to do that. It has its place.
Not all the time. Sometimes you want to have a high voice. Well, like Asher. Asher has a high voice.
Christopher has a very low voice. Golik is somewhere in between. Golik sounds like this. He's got a mid-low voice, a rather boxy sounding voice. It does go deep at times, but it's basically boxy. Not too deep. Not too deep.
Whereas Asher's voice is very deep.
I mean very high, actually. Sorry, dyslexia moment. Okay, so, by the way, Aaron Jelly, welcome to the live stream. Haven't seen you in a while. Ashnan, Calvin, Dominic, Refraction Studio. Glad everybody's here. All right, so now, for some people, the last 25 minutes of discussion has probably been the interesting part. And for other people, you're going, oh, get to the animation. When are you going to do some animation stuff? Trust me, people. I get it. Okay, so, and I posted, actually, I may be doing this more, we'll see. But I took what we did yesterday in terms of the pencil test and reposted it as like an 8-minute speed paint. So check that out on the channel. I figured I'll just, and actually, if you're interested, check out that speed paint because it's cool to watch, but also I also composed all of the music underneath it. So if you're wondering if I actually know what I'm talking about when I talk about this music stuff, listen to the video that I posted yesterday. That's a speed paint of the pencil test of this very shot that we did yesterday. Because all of that music was actually created for a corporate client for a really spectacular trade show unveiling of a new product kind of situation. It's really, really cool music. Very intense. So that's on the speed paint I posted yesterday. So if you wonder what the heck I'm talking about, it would be on my channel. It would be this little video right here. I guess it's actually only 6 minutes. So this is a speed paint of all of yesterday's work, basically. All right, cool. Back to work. Okay, so I want to point out one other thing, that there is actually a massive, massive, massive problem with this shot, okay, that I want to acknowledge right now because somebody with a sharp eye is going to catch the problem. And so I want to let you know that I'm not unaware of the problem. Okay, and this, I've done this, actually, this comes back to what I'm talking about not losing sight of the big picture. This very shot, I actually was guilty of it. I lost sight of the big picture. Let me show you how. Okay, so here's Carliana scolding Tianara. She walks over, she approaches the poor guy who's just feeling the coins that are in his hand, and she smacks the coins out of his hand, and there they go flying. Okay, so you might say, well, okay, what's the problem with that? Well, actually, based on the one thing we talked about yesterday is based on the setup of this shot, Carliana passing in front of Tianara in this direction doesn't actually make sense, because she would pass this way, which would mean if she was gonna pass in front of her, she would actually be passing in the opposite direction. So we could actually fix yesterday's shot, as a matter of fact, by simply reversing the direction that the mother goes. That would solve that. Okay. Then here, when she raises her arm and smacks the coins away, she's swinging her arm to the right, to her right, but yet the coins fly off to her left. So, friends, I want to acknowledge that from a logistical standpoint, some of this does not actually make sense. Now, can I be a hacker, or I should say a hack, and say, you know what, anybody who's watching this show is probably not going to notice these issues. They're going to be kind of watching the drama of the moment, and basically it works. And I would say, you know what, probably that's true. That is probably true. And for that reason, I'm not going to, I'm going to go ahead and finish out this shot anyway, right? But I am aware, and frankly, you know, the stuff I'm talking about, I'm learning every day. And the fact is, I blew it, okay, in two different ways. Just in this 20 seconds of show, there are two really serious staging errors, right? So, you know, it is what it is. But having said that, let's move forward. Okay, so first thing I want to do today is let's deal with ink and paint, and then we're going to get to shadows. This color, that's not what I want. I want to give kind of a slightly gray color, which is going to be the guy's beard. We need to actually, unfortunately, have an even almost the same shade of white, almost white but not quite, for the whites of his eyes. So I do think the beard needs to be slightly darker. So I'm going to use the what Tahoma calls the Smart Raster paint tool. Okay, and right now it's in lines and areas mode, which means if I can actually cover up my lines. Normally by default it's in areas mode, which means, as you can see here, it fills in the color but not the lines. So there we see a problem. Okay, so the basic thing that just happened is that there's a bit of a, let's just put it this way. When Tahoma or OpenToonz, actually never mind what I was about to say. The Smart Raster paint tool, which OpenToonz calls the Paintbrush tool, as distinct from the brush tool. So this is the brush. OpenToonz calls this the Paintbrush. In Tahoma2D, you've got the brush, you've got the Smart Raster paint tool. Anyway, the actual problem that I just had was actually because of this line right here. But what happens is, if you create this color border with the Smart Raster paintbrush, this area will fill, and indeed it did. And now we'll go ahead and do the eyebrows as well. But if I were to repaint the face, it would still fill in the beard, because with the Smart Raster paint tool, the edges that you create with color only work for creating fill areas for that color. It's kind of stupid, and I think it's thank you, Aaron. That's a very gracious way of looking at my mistakes. It's kind of stupid, but it is what it is. So that's just something to be aware of. When I'm dealing with faces, I tend to use the Smart Raster Paint tool kind of a lot because it's just easier to just go in and hand paint the stuff. So with that, we will do so. Yes, we will. Okay, so now, looky here. Well, the thing about it is that you got to realize the only thing that changes through this sequence is his hand. Okay, so now let me actually make a correction on his hand, or actually finish filling it in right there. And then I'm going to check and see if... Okay, so there we have another one. So let's get the hand filled in, and then we'll see that Tahoma will allow you to cut and paste quite literally everything. Because at the end of the day, a smart raster level, or a what OpenToonz calls a Toonz raster level, is essentially a flat two-dimensional pixel grid. So why do I say that? Sorry, that was a mistake right there. I needed to hit the S key. What I'm getting at is I can take this whole section, Control C, and just paste it over the next few frames. And so I only had to do the ink and paint once. Now, some people would argue for actually having put the hand area just on a separate layer. And that's definitely one approach. Okay, so now let's get to Carliana. Well, Carliana, same situation. We need to get her eyes painted, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint them in as simply as possible, and then we'll go in and deal with the irises. As I recall, her irises are the same color as Tianara's, because, it's her mother. And so she'll have like emerald green eyes, which I think is an interesting, it's a contradiction that's kind of interesting, because what I'm saying is this woman has fairly beautiful eyes. She's kind of a nasty character, but yet she's got fairly attractive eyes. So that sort of inner contradiction I find rather interesting. Don't you? Don't you find it interesting? I find it all very, very, very interesting. Very interesting indeed. So you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, man, this guy, like, he likes to listen to himself talk. I think that's what's really going on here. This guy, like, loves to hear himself talk. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I actually had to take speech classes when I was in elementary school. I could not say CHs. They sounded like CHs. I'd say church. I had a definite issue with my diction. Okay, so now we need to add this color, which, as I say, is quite a beautiful color. And it's not important that we get the color exactly right, because of course we can change it after the fact. Lovely. Isn't she lovely? Isn't she beautiful? Actually, when Stevie Wonder did that song, I don't believe the lyric is beautiful. I believe it's wonderful. And I also think the key I just did is wrong. Isn't she lovely? Isn't she wonderful? Something like that. Something like that. Okay, so now, as we're in here right now with the Smart Raster Paintbrush tool, we can see some glitches and hiccups that, it's very convenient to just be able to use this in areas mode, so you don't have to worry about going over your lines or trying to weave between the lines. You can just paint. Just paint, friends. Now I have a hotkey set up that the G key for me, you can set your own, but basically what it does is it's not sampling the RGB value of the color here. What it's doing is it's sampling and telling me what palette entry that color corresponds to, what index, I guess you'd say. So it makes it pretty easy to select a color. Like right here, I could hit the G key and then the V key and then just color in that little hiccup right there. Same with her skin. G key selects the skin color, not by RGB value, but actually by palette entry. And then the V key to go like that. So now it seems to me there were a few things in Mama Carliana that were wrong. Yes, right there we got a little problem with flesh. Flesh tone is missing. Here we've got actually a little spot right there that doesn't want to fill. Let me deal with the flesh tone situation fully. I think that's it. And by the way, obviously, oh, there's another one. Obviously, we're going to have to deal with the background too. That's going to be a job. So we got 5 people here. Any chance you could give a quick comparison of the strengths of OpenToonz and Tahoma? As far as I'm concerned, there's only one difference. Actually, I mean that quite literally. The only practical difference between Tahoma and OpenToonz for me, in my experience, everything I've done, and I've done most of what you can do with OpenToonz or Tahoma, I've done. So the question, very obviously, is, well, why do you use Tahoma as opposed to OpenToonz? Okay, quick caveat. There are tiny changes that get introduced with the dot increment releases. So Tahoma, I believe, is on version 1.2. OpenToonz is on 1.5, but basically they're the same. And what happens is each one adds a feature or two. Yeah, I know, Dominic, you're right. Yeah, I'll get to that. I can see one right now. So recently Tahoma added a bloom post-processing effect. And then shortly thereafter, that same effect showed up in OpenToonz. That's what happens. The two projects run not completely, but largely in tandem. If you were going to identify one or the other as being the more experimental version, it would certainly be Tahoma, because there's a little different philosophy, and the builders of OpenToonz are a little more selective about the changes that they're willing to go ahead and adopt into the code base. I would put it that way. All of which is kind of neither here nor there, because at the end of the day, pretty much all the features wind up in both programs. So again, now we're back to the core question, well, why do you use Tahoma then, Dave? And the answer is really simple. There's a feature in Tahoma that OpenToonz doesn't have, and there's no sign on the horizon that it's going to have it, which is the ability to cut and paste using the clipboard. And by the way, that works on Windows and Linux. I don't know about the Mac, but I know it works on Windows and Linux. Okay? Which means, for all practical purposes, you can pick your favorite program, which for me is Krita, and it works seamlessly with Tahoma2D, because I can do art in Krita, and just literally, I can cut and paste layers or entire groups of layers from Krita and just paste it into Tahoma, and it becomes a standard raster level in Tahoma. So for me, it's a very seamless integration of the two programs, just using the clipboard. It's great, and I've used it a million times. So for me, that's the reason, and it's really the only reason that I use Tahoma. I can see, by the way, that this is pretty sloppy there, Jack. Now, does it matter? No, doesn't matter. Why? Because this picture is only on the screen for one frame. And I'm not trying to be a slop hog here, but the reality is, if it's only on the screen for one frame, no one's ever going to see these flaws. Everything I'm doing right now is actually unnecessary in terms of these fix-ups. You will never see them. Never, 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 never. Now, on this frame, you're going to see it. Why? Because this frame lasts for about 2/3 of a second. So you've got time to digest what you're seeing. So this frame, it's important that we clean it up nicely. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a little pragmatic and saying sometimes this stuff matters, sometimes it doesn't. But that's just me. When you're trying to do something that, right now we've got 48 minutes of animation to do, of which 45 minutes are done. Now, what I'm doing right now is going back and making changes and fixes to that 45 minutes. So there's more than just the last 3 minutes of the 2 episodes of the show to do. That is true. But when you've got that much you're trying to do, it tends to make you a little bit pragmatic about your process. Oops, wrong color there, fella. Now that can introduce a danger where you swing too far the other way. And I've done it, and it's the whole reason why I'm having to make all these corrections. Because in the past, I've allowed my pursuit of rapid, efficient production to cause me to make decisions that now in hindsight were stupid. Why? Because if you're going to have to redo it, how much time did you actually save? Answer, none. 0. Big fat 0 there, friend. So it doesn't do you any good to save time if you're going to have to redo the darn thing. Okay, so now one thing here would be, I gotta change this to, this crops you to the camera and this doesn't. So what I need to do here is, yeah, okay, so I'm going to sample that palette entry and then I can fill that. So I'm looking for mistakes. I'm assuming that will fill properly. Okay, this won't. This is going to be a problem. Yeah, you see. So here's what we need to do. Hit the B key and at least close that up like that so that we can just fill that. And now if we crop to the camera, we can see that we're all good. Okay. We're getting close here to shadow time. Oop, there's a problem on our nose. That one we will not. Oopsie poo. My bad. I need to be in areas mode so I'm not covering up my lines. Okay. You might ask why we don't have a tween between this and this, as well as a tween actually between this and this. And the reason is because one of the economies of this production, yeah, cool, Aaron. Good. Yeah, I mean, I'm you know, one of the ways that Tahoma was ahead of the curve, ahead of OpenToonz, and may still be actually, has to do with portability. Has to do with the ability to just unzip Tahoma and everything works, and it does not make any assumptions about what you want to do, and store configuration and data files in your system folders, which of course on Linux would be your home folder. Tahoma doesn't make those assumptions. Tahoma keeps everything contained within its own set of folders, which personally, there's no contest in that regard. I way prefer, I don't like, especially, look, we're in a period of time now where it's been at least 10, maybe 20 years since hard drive space has been a problem. So your program storing its configuration in its own folders and whatnot, to me it's mandatory, you know, and I found it intolerably annoying the way OpenToonz would store stuff in the system folders for the longest time. Okay, so I want to do one thing. If we look at her flesh tone, now one thing about Tianara, Carliana, and arguably the old guy here in this shot is that their skin tone is actually they're basically antecedents to the Greek. So where are they from? I mean, this is the ancient world, right? Arguably, yes, yeah. Well, that's another thing. Okay, so Aaron's talking about perspective grids. I personally have never used them. Of course, you have perspective grids, a very good system. In Krita, and if I remember correctly, the perspective grid system in Tahoma2D is actually based on the system in Krita. I'm pretty sure that's true. Okay, so by the way, I'm going to go really saturated here so that I can see what I'm doing, and I want to just push a little bit over to the green end of the spectrum, and then lighten it back up again, and I feel like I probably went too far. But yeah, that's about right. That's about the right skin tone for Tianara and Carliana. They're mother and daughter, so obviously they would have a similar look. Okay. All right. So, couple things. I want to change one thing. This was the interior of the eyes of the old guy. Up. It looks like I used the same color for his beard as well. So I'm going to darken the beard a bit. And I don't know, that doesn't really work. According to the earlier shots, I think his beard was basically pretty white. I mean, he's a pretty elderly guy. So there we have the problem I mentioned earlier with the Smart Raster paint tool. The solution would be to draw a line with the standard brush here so that there's a true border here and here, and now it will fill properly. So, and then we've got some garbage because of the lines, so that's where you need to go into lines and areas mode with the Smart Raster paint tool and just suffer through painting it over. So anyway, I wanted to get this guy looking correct. So N key to go to actual size. And of course, okay, so that means we need to go ahead and do this again. Control C, so I'm just going to hit the greater than sign. Control V, Control V, Control V, and there we go. Okay. So now what I need to do is get this guy colored. He's actually in a separate level. So what I'm going to do is I need his garment color, which is, well, doggone it, now I don't remember. G key, boom. Okay, so this is his garment. This would be his flesh tone. This would be his little hat. And this would be his beard. So I'm going to go Control C, and then I'm going to come over to this level and just paste all those colors in so I can use them. And now when I go back here, I want to check one thing. Is this? Yes, okay, so that color is what his outlines are. So I'm going to put that as a little more of a charcoal color. And then we'll just hit the fill tool. Oh, we had a leak. Where? Oh, there's the leak right there. All it takes is one, people. Okay, so now while we're here, let me see something. Okay. We do have this in Tahoma. I don't know if this has made its way into OpenToonz yet. But we do have fill gaps. I believe close and fill would fill the gap with an actual line, I guess. I'm not quite sure. I'm just going to go fill gaps. That worked. So, cool. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, and now I'm just going to hit the V key and kind of make like this and give the man his beard. Okay, so OpenToonz filing system is kind of overwhelming. Not really, Aaron. There's really only 3 things you need to know. So let's make this simple. Let's make this really, really simple. When Tahoma2D creates a project, it creates a bunch of folders in the you name your project, and then it creates a bunch of folders for you. The main thing you need to remember is this: when you create a Smart Raster level or a vector level, it gets stored in the drawings folder. If you create a raster level or cut and paste using the clipboard, the images, when you save all, the images get saved in the extras folder. Those 2 little bits of information will probably pretty much take care of you most of the time. So there you go. There you go. Most of the time. Of course, there will be exceptions. Alright. So now let's deal with shadows. I like using vector levels for shadows. So I create a vector level like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the B key. And I'm going to just start drawing. And the reason I use vectors is because we can have, boop, automatic shape filling, which is quite useful. So I'm going to go ahead and put some shadows here, and actually judiciously probably we need sort of a bit of a cast shadow and then something along her arm, yada yada yada. And then what we'll do is we'll just lower this to 12. Typically 12 or 13 is what I use for shadows. And one setting you want to make sure you have set is this. You go into your scene, scene settings, enable column color filter and transparency for rendering. Click. That makes it so that this transparency that I just baked into the level itself will actually render that way. Okay, there we go. And now we will scramble. And by the way, you see how the opacity of it doubled up on itself? It will not render that way. It will actually resolve it to a solid color and then add the, calculate the transparency after that. So just so you know. Just so you know. Oh yeah, another key thing here with vector levels is if you're gonna spontaneously create new cells in the X sheet like I just did, make sure if you have these options, auto close, auto group, and auto fill, if you have them all enabled so that you get these filled shapes, make sure when you go to a blank cell that you actually draw a shape. Do not just click like a dot in order to create the new cell, figuring, okay, then I'll do my painting or my drawing. Don't do that. If you do, Tahoma will crash and it'll literally immediately disappear. The whole screen will disappear. It'll just poof, gone. Like a really massive crash type situation. And you don't want a massive crash, do you? So,
heed the master's advice in this regard. You must heed the master's advice. If you don't, you will always regret it every time.
Okay, so I'm morphing.
I'm morphing between the voice of Asher. This is the voice of Asher.
And I morphed into more of an Indian thing. More of a Sadhguru type of voice. I love the voice of Sadhguru. He is very, very entertaining. I find him quite entertaining every day. I do not necessarily agree with everything this man has to say. If you do not know who I'm talking about, that is your loss. That is your misfortune. But, so Dominic Jokiel has a question, and I will answer it the very, very best of my ability now. How is the vector performance, Tahoma? The vector performance? I guess I would say this. It sounds like you're not really asking about You're asking about performance from the vantage point of crashes. Okay. It has been my experience, bearing in mind that I don't use vectors much. Okay, so I'm not drawing shapes. Like if I was going to draw a bunch of shapes and then edit the vectors, I would probably be doing it in Inkscape, right? Which is really stable. I would probably use Inkscape for heavy-duty vector art editing. I would not do that in OpenToonz. However, of course, you can hit the C key and you can go in and edit these. And it's been my experience, as best I can tell, that over the last couple years, I think mainly driven by the Tahoma2D development, the stability of vectors is greatly improved over what it used to be. It used to be, as you say, it was bad. Like, it was crashing every 5 seconds, So I would say vastly improved. But again, if you're wanting to do heavy-duty vector work, I wouldn't do it in Tahoma. You can try, it's going to cost you an hour to dink around with it. And of course you want to save your work frequently. But I do not use vectors for like inking. Some people, like if you go to Darren T's channel, he loves using vectors. I mean, he's really big on vectors. And I personally, I'm not sure why, but I think that the editability, especially if you're a person who doesn't necessarily consider yourself all that great at drawing, then you may be attracted to vectors because the editability aspect. Oh, and by the way, just to be clear, if I was really dying to mess around with a vector format, I would also be looking really seriously at the Blender grease pencil. Okay? In fact, for animation, if you really want a scalable, editable format, as far as I'm concerned, unless you want to pay for Adobe Animate and kind of go down the Flash direction, the Blender Grease Pencil is what you want to be looking at, because it's extremely powerful, extremely stable, and improving every day, because the development culture is state of the art with Blender, which of course leaves somebody out there to say, well, Dave, then why aren't you using Blender on this project? At the end of the day, the overall workflow for animation, for 2D animation, is still more mature. And while there's a few things you can do with the Blender Grease Pencil that would be difficult to do with, you know, smart raster levels in Tahoma, basically there's nothing there in the Blender Grease Pencil that's particularly useful to me in my workflow. So, I mean, I use Blender here and there. I mean, I've been using Blender for 20 years. Some of you guys weren't born when I started using Blender. I mentioned yesterday I was the first human being on the planet to create a Blender training video. And I created 3 of them back in, you know, year 2000. I was first in line selling Blender videos online, actually. Initially, we were selling them as, well, I say we, it was really me, but initially DVDs, actually. And interestingly, again, this is like the year 2000. Interestingly, once I offered it as a digital download, no one ever bought another DVD. Like overnight, DVD sales ended the minute I offered a digital, you know, version. No one, literally not one person, ever bought a DVD again. Well, I don't know how interesting that is, but there it is. Do with it what you will. Okay, so now I have a little bit of an interesting question I need to answer, which is, am I going to, if I don't bake any shadows into this area right here, I could extend this shadow over this whole section, and so it's debatable whether the shadows directly on that hand actually matter, especially because I expect that the body highlight effect is going to offset that little deficiency enough to just make it pretty much unimportant. Let's find out. Okay, so I'm going to go into rendered mode. Okay, and we can see that actually the pencil test needs to be turned off. Okay, so now I'm going to hit the F3 key, which pulls up the schematic, and I don't want the stage schematic, which is sort of the structure of my program, or my scene. I want the effects schematic, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my characters, which are on column 3, and I'm going to add light body highlight. Okay, so now I need to, this is really hard to see without a background, isn't it? Let's solve that problem as well. How do we want to do this? Let me think about this for half a second. There's a few considerations at this moment that are all converging at the same time. One having to do with the background, the other having to do with the light direction. Actually, this light direction is basically correct, it looks like. Okay, so let's go to the old man. And I would say, looking at the parameters, probably 0.3. I want a little less blur. I want this to be a little more transparent. And again, as you can see, what I was talking about is that the body highlight effect is catching this edge, which is what I wanted to do. Let's see if we switch this to 10. Yeah, that's better. That's better. It's a little more above, and I think the Y is right now it's 22. That's the default. I'm going to change that to like 16. Yeah, it's just feel like it's just a little too much. Okay, and then frankly, I'm going to go ahead and do what I've been doing lately a lot, which is I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to hit Control C, grab the wire that connects these, and then hit Control V, which makes a duplicate of it. And then this one, I'm going to invert it. So click Invert. I'm going to change the color to black. I'm going to ramp up. Actually, forget what I was about to say. I'm not going to ramp up the blur. But the transparency probably should be maybe about here. And then, let me think about this half a second. What I think I want to do is, let's turn this back up to 28. And then let's get the X, let's just put it to 0. Yeah. Now let me see what that did to... Basically, I'm liking what I'm seeing. So, yes, that feels pretty good. Let's roll with that. Okay, so, and again, I would argue for the old man. I don't think it's necessary that I do a bunch of hand-tooled shadows here. I think that the world is going to forgive me for that one. But I could always change my mind and go in and do it. So anyway, back to Carliana. We want to turn off the effects so that I can kind of see what I'm doing here as far as shadows go. See you, Dominic. I use them for ink and cleanup. Yep, so I'm just doing my thing. Doing my thing here today. I love doing my thing. Ooh, she is absolutely a little bit wicked. I am going to go a little further than I normally would here with the shadow detail. I'm just kind of liking what I see. I'm going to go ahead and let this sort of almost be like an encroaching shadow. Encroaching. Closing in, sort of. Yes. Ominous. Frightening. Evil. Etc., etc., etc. Okay, yeah. I love that. It pushes. She's got this turned up nose that's just evil. Not that turned up noses are, that's a dangerous thing to say. What I just said was probably not appropriate. Because maybe you have a turned up nose and it's almost like I'm saying that's ugly or something. Or looks inherently evil, which really is not true. So I apologize if you're one of the turned up nose people. Sorry to offend you just now. I take it back. I take it back. I didn't mean it. Okay, this one can be extended to here. I think. Yeah. I wonder what happens if we actually go like this. I don't know. I don't like that. I'm going to hit Z and Z. Yeah, I'm not joking. I have the Z key set up to be undo. For most people, obviously, it's Control Z. Not me. I like Z. Kind of stole that idea from My Paint years ago. I liked the fact that My Paint used a straight Z for undo. But yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing here. This is feeling pretty good. Pretty good. That was a little extreme. Let's keep rocking. Let's keep rocking. Keep rocking. Keep on rocking. Okay. Oh, we went outside the lines a little bit. Okay, well, here's where vector editing may be useful. Hit the C key, click that, and then just... I don't actually ever use a rectangular selection. I'm going to switch it to freehand. So C key, and then just grab all these nodes and delete them. Grab all these nodes, delete them. Problem solved. Problem solved. Yeah, so the vectors have not... I haven't had a crash related to vectors other than the thing about making a dot when you're in auto close, auto group, autofill. I haven't had a crash in a long time. So I would have to say all in all the vectors are pretty stable, people. Pretty stable. Alright. So this is kind of a big move. Big move. Of course, it's only on the screen for one frame, so... wonder how the markets are doing today. We had a brief surge in Ethereum last week, and then it petered out again. Pretty badly, actually. It's been... now, it might be up today, but boy, it was tanking. It was tanking yesterday. Tanking, I tell you. Boom. This probably should all be shadow, I think. So you don't ever want to underestimate the benefit you get from judicious use of shadows. This will put a little shadow under her bosom. And we probably should reinforce a little bit of this wrinkle action. Again, this one's only on the screen for one frame. And by the way, there's a good case to be made that once we land on this final pose, that we do a camera push in on Carliana. I think that would be worth considering, although we could do that at the editing stage by just cropping the rendered shot. But yeah, like I said, you can see that you gain a lot of production value with the judicious use of shadows. And I definitely do like the way things are looking. It reminds me, well, as someone said yesterday, it might have been Max, I don't remember, but somebody said yesterday that basically this really doesn't look like an anime. So hence I've changed my descriptions on my videos. I'm saying 2D animation instead of anime. There's some things about the anime methodology and aesthetic that I really don't adhere to, and so anyway, the bottom line is it kind of looks like, I don't know, reminds me of like Johnny Quest maybe or something, other than the fact that you don't have variable thickness in your ink lines. Okay, but well, my style most recently has definitely been influenced to a degree by Alex Toth. I'm sorry, I said his name wrong. Alex Toth. Chris, when do you plan to start the crowdfunding? Well, Chris, that's a great question. I keep talking about it, and frankly, the go time officially would be in a couple days. And you know what? I still may go live on Indiegogo in a couple days, but I tell you the truth. Let me tell you. I'm glad you asked that because I want to tell you what the internal debate I have. I mentioned, I think yesterday, maybe the day before, that in terms of my social network and my social presence, it doesn't exist. Okay, basically this is it. You know, I mean, of course I'm on Facebook, but you know, YouTube is my main go-to place. I don't really spend much time tweeting or on LinkedIn or anything like that, right? Okay, so the problem is that all the crowdfunding platforms like Indiegogo, I mean, the very first thing they're going to tell you is to have 10,000 people in your email list. Okay, so the question one asks oneself when you talk about crowdfunding is, does the crowdfunding platform, in other words, like right now, if I wanted to, well, Chris, the trailer, I think you mean the pitch video, because the trailer is what you see when you go to my YouTube channel anyway. It's always, it's a pinned video. Well, okay, it's not a trailer, actually. Forgive me, I'm wrong. What's pinned on my YouTube channel is the introduction to the show. So it's like a 1-minute video that's the show intro. It's not really a trailer. I need to do a trailer. I need to do one of those, in a world where everything goes wrong, blah, 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 blah. It'd be fun. Do that kind of trailer. So the pitch video is mostly done, and I may do some additions to it that do a better job of telling my story. Okay? My story meaning, my story in a nutshell is, I'm a guy that's essentially a one-man studio. I've made feature films that have been fairly successful, but I always wanted to make a cartoon. I mean, something I always wanted to do. Ever since I was in high school, back in the 1980s. And I think I have a methodology for doing it, and I'm going to try my best. That's pretty much my story. So if people want to get behind that, that's great. Okay, so now what I'm getting around to here is this. If I wanted to set something up, skip Patreon, skip Indiegogo, skip everything. Okay, and I appreciate that, Chris. I'll consider that. I'm everybody's input I am taking into account, believe me. I see, frankly, to the degree that I have peeps, you guys are it. Okay? Right? And so everything that you're telling me you think is good or makes sense in the development of the show, believe me, your opinions are heard, and I'm taking them into account, because I figure whatever Chris thinks is, there's probably at least a million other people that probably have the same opinion. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that if I wanted to set up something right now and put a link below, hey, Momoristic, if I want to put a link below this video so that you could go to blendedplanet.com right now, this minute, and give maybe $25 or something just to support what I'm doing here on this YouTube channel, I could have that in place half an hour from now. And in place and immediately begin talking about it on my videos. Okay? And, providing the links and all the rest. So you go, well, Dave, why haven't you done that? Well, there's a multiplicity of things that all are working together, but the question in regard to crowdfunding that one naturally asks is, does the platform do anything at all to help you gain awareness of the thing you're doing? Or is it more accurate to say, if you don't have a substantial promotional budget, you're going to get lackluster results? It just is what it is. Now, my suspicion is that the latter is more true. That would be my suspicion. I don't know that that's true. I haven't used Indiegogo before, but obviously they talk a lot about your promotional budget and all that sort of thing. So they wouldn't talk about it if it wasn't the case that pretty much it's essential if you want to get a good result. So I have the problem of going, the infrastructure of my life in terms of my social presence is not even 1% of where it needs to be to get the promotional penetration and ostensibly the response that one would need. I mean, I'm just, as a businessman, I'm just realistic about that. I think it is what it is. And I saw that with I did a crowdfund on Healed by Grace 2, the last movie I released, and it only made like a couple $1,000s. And frankly, all of the contributions came from people who are in my network. Not all, but most of them, were people I knew or could very clearly see what the connection was that caused them to know me. Okay? If that makes sense. So, at the end of the day, there's not a hurry. I think one of the, a lot of times what happens on Indiegogo is you post a concept. You say, this is my concept. This is what I want to do, and I need your help to do it. And my case is a little different because, number one, I don't really necessarily need the help in order to be sure that I'm going to release these first 2 episodes and get them in the market. Get them on all the platforms, Tubi, Pluto TV, here on YouTube, whatever. I'm very, very sure that that's all going to happen. So the problem is not whether what I'm doing here on YouTube is going to get done. It's going to get done. The question is, can I put my head down, focus on this show as a full-time job? Because right now I generally only give it a couple hours a day. Last couple days I've gone a little longer, but basically it takes a couple hours a day is what I do. And by the way, right now Tahoma is saving, so so the question becomes, well, what are you crowdfunding? I'm crowdfunding the ability to focus and make it full-time, which will very realistically bring the production cycle down to about 4 months. If we get funded fully, then ostensibly I will be able to do that and make producing the show my full-time job for the full 12 episodes, which means that's all I'm going to be doing for the next 4 years. Okay? And additionally to that, if we're funded to a certain point, then I can hire a team and bring the production cycle from 4 months down to maybe 2 months or maybe 1 month. That would be good. So that's but you're right, Chris. I appreciate you saying that. There are so many things that I could do. And so right now, the basic tug of war in terms of my minutes and my hours, how am I using my minutes and my hours? And the basic question right now is between essentially stopping everything and focusing fully on just getting the word out about what I'm doing versus continuing to make progress on the show and just doing what I'm doing right now. If you have the pilot, can you pitch it to networks? Well, okay, that's a really good question. I would say this. That would be what's going to happen. This is my prediction. I'll be really surprised if this doesn't turn out to be true. What's going to happen is that when Salt and Light gets released, number one, I would expect that as it gets some traction in the marketplace, that will actually feed back into the crowdfunding aspect, which means that I would expect that most of the crowdfunding result will actually be because people are aware of it because it's already released. So there's a bit of a loop there, okay? The other thing that's going to happen, though, is that once this show gets out there and does get a little bit of traction, that's going to open up other opportunities to pitch ideas to maybe Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, even Tubi. Actually, Tubi's doing direct-to-Tubi productions now. Okay? So I just think that because there's just not... Basically, nobody in the history of the world has actually accomplished what I'm doing here, as far as I know. Okay? Meaning, has anyone ever, pretty much all by themselves, other than the voice actors that you need in addition to me, has anyone ever created an actual, even one episode of a 24-minute cartoon, let alone a couple, let alone 12? Has anyone ever done it? As far as I know, no one's ever done it. This is a first in the world as far as I know. If you know of someone else that has done it, let me know. I would be very curious to see what they did. I think it'd be a super cool thing. So it takes a certain work ethic and determination, to stay the course, which I am doing and will continue to do, to do what I'm trying to do. Okay, so, and by the way, I need to add a shadow here. So having said that, I do firmly believe that will create other opportunities. If you have the pilot, can you pitch it to networks, was your question. So my point was that my opportunity to pitch to networks is later. Okay, and networks for me includes both cable networks, but it also includes platforms. like your Netflix and all the rest. Yeah, frame by frame is harder, but you know what? I mean, if I was going for the most efficient production so I could crank out shows fast, you're correct. I would be doing 3/4 view. I'll tell you what I'd be doing. I'd be doing something along these lines. Let me just pull this up. Let's just go to... I would be doing something like this. If I was going for the absolute most efficient production, I would do Wildcrats. Because what they've got is they've got rigged characters, essentially what you do in Anime Studio Pro. It's all vector-based. It's all based on rigs, and with very few exceptions, there are exceptions, but they're few, the characters are always in a 3/4 view. And...
videos!
Whoa, and frankly, it looks really good. You know, so I would be doing something like this. That's just not quite what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do here is more of a hybrid, westernized anime type of thing. And part of the reason for that is because of what I'm learning in the process. In other words, if I take what I've learned doing this, especially just from the standpoint of my drawing improving, you know, over the last year. Exactly. You have to think, you have to use puppets. And I've done that. I mean, I've got Anime Studio Pro on this machine. Between Anime Studio Pro and Blender, you could really do a nice job of setting up rigs and approaching a show that way. It's just not what I'm trying to do here. This is more of, as I say, a westernized anime type of thing. And, you know, it's all good. It's just a question of what you're trying to do. So, so now I just told Tahoma to create a raster level, and it seems to be, hey, Tom, doing art. You always seem to show up a couple hours into it. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, let's just go ahead and do a fill operation. Okay, and so now I'm going to sneak this back here. And smack it up to there. Okay, so we're going to go to here. Whoa, I think I just heard Kyle sneeze, like in a big way. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my oil paintbrush. I'm just going to block this in, okay? All I'm going to do is I'm going to stay in this zone, I think, which is going to be pretty much fairly muted color. And then I basically want to be in the green zone. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of block in some stuff here. All right, I'm not in a particular hurry. I want to just kind of map what I kind of sort of think I'm going to want to do in terms of a background. If I was really, really wanting the optimal background painting situation, I would be using Krita right now. But my paintbrushes work quite well. And I've done a lot of background paintings with my paintbrushes in Tahoma and OpenToonz. And they're great, actually. They're really great. Okay, so now doing it the way I just did it actually is quite useful. In that there's a lot of noise in it. Like there's kind of some hiccups here in the painting that actually just make it look more real and more earthy and more like, you know, the ground. Right? Looks fine. Okay, so I'm hitting Control tilde, which I set up hotkeys so that I could be able to solo a layer. Okay, so what we want to do here is, according to the other shots, essentially, we've got kind of a dirty, dusty road type situation here. And the guy's kind of sitting in the road, actually. A little unusual, a little strange, but so we'll just put the guy kind of in the road. All right, but then there was also, I'm hitting the R key to sample the RGB color here. Boom. And then basically you had a little bit more of the green grass area behind it. So one thing I'm really being cognizant of at the moment is perspective. Okay. And it looks like we're probably in pretty good shape perspective-wise. Now it's actually daytime, so now we need to probably jump back up into this type of a zone. And let's go to the blue. Let's not do purple. Probably something like that would be pretty good. Nah, it still feels a little purple to me. So push a little more towards the blue. Yeah, that's better. I like that. do 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 do. And now what I could do is go, boom. Oops, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to hit the fill tool. Okay, so that took care of that, got us started. So now I'm thinking also about gradients. The idea that we're going to want probably a little bit of a vignetting on the shots. And since we actually have multiple shots combined in one here, we probably want to do the vignetting on a separate level so that we can sort of have it be common to all levels. I mean, it's almost always a good idea. A little bit of vignetting is usually a good thing. Okay, so one thing people often forget about atmospheric perspective, by the way, is that the sky actually gets lighter, not darker, as it moves towards the ground in the horizon. And the reason for that is because essentially the air's thicker. I mean, there's more atmosphere condensed into a smaller space, and it occludes what's in the background. So if you want to have it actually look kind of real-ish, you want to go lighter as you approach the horizon. Okay? You say, well, wait a second, Dave. Well, what about clouds and stuff like that? We'll get to it. Okay, so if we're going to do a little bit of that, we'll say maybe a little something like that. Not bad. Not bad. Off there in the distance. So yeah, this oil paintbrush in the My Paintbrushes, which is down, it's this one. I use it in my paint as well. I use the brush I use in Krita for most, painting has a very similar feel, but this is a really, really good brush for getting an actual painting dynamic going on where it feels like it's a nice balance between applying color and blending with the color that's already there. Will the vignette be combined using effects? Yeah, normally that's what I've been doing. Normally what you're going to see is going to be some kind of gradient that's in overlay mode. Usually it just makes the colors a little richer around the edges and just adds a little bit of variety in the look of the thing. One thing I'm wondering about right now is why am I seeing the sketch here? Oh, I need to turn that off too. Sorry. Little stupid attack there. Okay, so now in my other paintings, let's do this. Let's go -2. Yeah, that's fine. Alright, so I'm going to hit the R key, sample that, and then we're going to work a little bit lighter. And by the way, this is where I like to hit the N key. So I'm seeing this, and I think I'm going to actually make this -1. I'm seeing this at the actual size it's going to be rendered. And the reason I want to look at that is because I want to have an appropriate sense of what my level of detail should be. It's really easy to zoom way in and put all kinds of detail that when it actually renders you're never even going to see on the one hand. And at the other extreme, there might be something here I want to comment on that's kind of important. Okay, this brush that I'm singing the praises of, right now, as you can see, basically it's got an angle to it. So what I'm going to look at right now is when we flip the canvas, does it also flip the angle? And the answer is yes. Okay, so personally I find that a little undesirable, but you can, if you don't actually want that angle, that angling on the brush, go into the settings, and I figured out last week what it was. Elliptical dab ratio and angle. Actually, it's the angle. If you knock this down to 0, it makes it a round brush. So for some people that may be useful. Frankly, there's a lot of situations where that would be preferable. So it's the elliptical dab angle. Elliptical dab angle. All right. Okay. Just kind of keeping it loose. And for those of you who, don't really care about background painting, then this might be a little too boring for you. But I gotta do it. I gotta do it. No getting around that. So again, N key. Alright, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like it. I'm squinting right now so that I can just get a better sense of just the contrast. When you squint, you let less light into your eyes. Your everything moves slightly towards gray, and your dynamic range reduces, so you get a simplified view. If you get found and hire people, are you going to rent, buy a studio, or you work from home? Well, I've worked from home for 30 years, so working from home is pretty much my modus operandi. Has been for many, 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 many years, since the early 1990s, actually. So I don't expect that to change. I think that if we're going to hire people, they could work from home, just like I do, I suppose. And so, in other words, the question for some people might be, well, could I be part of that team? And the answer is yeah, sure, of course. So, Chris, if you've got some material that you want me to see, I'll always take a look at it, and I'm going to give you my honest opinion. About where your current skill set might fit into my plans, if the situation allowed for it. The financial situation. I mean, that's part of what the whole crowdfunding thing is all about. I'm going to go ahead and sort of tease some foreground stuff here a little bit. That actually looks stupid. Let's rethink that. Well, it's fun to just sometimes just take a little breather and just have fun fiddling with painting. I've shown the some of the wildlife painting I've done. If I wasn't doing the animation thing, if I wasn't chasing the animation thing, I probably would be doing like wildlife painting, because I'll do wildlife paintings and then post them on Facebook. And it's really weird. I had a guy who years ago had auditioned for part in one of the movies I wrote and directed. And I didn't really know much about him, but it turns out about 3 weeks ago or something, I posted a painting on Facebook, and it turns out that he runs a gallery, and he's like, anytime you want to do anytime you want to do a show, a gallery show, just let me know. I'm like, wow, that's really nice. That's a really nice thing to offer. I mean, I've never done anything like that, but if you guys are wondering what the heck I'm even talking about, I can show you, just in case you care. So if I go to the L drive and I go to paintings, you're going to see, actually this is a knockoff. This is actually a Frazetta knockoff, so it's a copy, but I did it in watercolor, which is pretty challenging. But so I'll give 1 minute here to Dave's painting. So these are all watercolors actually. That's an acrylic. That's acrylic. That's acrylic. That's gouache, I think, which would be opaque watercolor. That's digital. That's digital. That's digital. That's digital. That's digital. That's actually for a friend, and I need to get back with her on that particular project. That's a watercolor. That's, you know, real, you know, actual watercolor. These, all the ones that are watercolor are actually real paint, you know, they're not digital. That was an illustration for a friend of mine. And that's actually a painting of me turned into an elf. And then we have some oil and acrylic paintings of horses. That's acrylic. And of course that's Michelle. Actually, it's not a very good Michelle. It's a cross between Michelle and Marilyn McCoo, as far as I can tell. So, anyway, yep, watercolor. That's a watercolor I did fairly recently. So you get the idea. So that's a really fun to do. Extremely therapeutic, real quiet. You know, you just kind of sit and, you know, it's just you. It's just you doing the painting. Okay, so I'm going to grab this color, and then we're going to hit the B key, and just try to keep this pretty clean and simple. So I also want to look at the whole, my whole range of my painting, because otherwise, if I don't hit the edges, then of course the fill operations won't work. Oops. So now I can fill that. And so you mentioned tips. I don't consider myself great at background painting. Okay, so I don't really know. I've given some tips in the past relating to things like just how to grab the edge of something, and okay, so like maybe a good example would be like right here in the foreground. I do want to have some grass. Okay, so he's sitting on the in the dirt basically, and I actually looks like I made a mistake. I can fix it this way. Let's grab this, just move this down here, and then hit the R key, sample this, and then do the fill tool. Okay, so kind of what I'm doing right now is kind of stupid actually, since this will not show in the, you know, this is what we're going to render, so everything I'm doing with the grass is kind of stupid. But for the purposes of discussion, you can go as deep as you want, but the idea would be this. You always want to be thinking about, there's two things that I would be thinking about a lot. One I'm good at, the other I'm not good at. The one I'm not good at is composition. I don't consider myself great at composition. I don't consider myself great at color theory. You know, good balanced color. I think it's one of my weaknesses for sure. One thing I am good at though is being aware, because I can draw. Like I don't actually think I'm that great at painting. But I'm pretty good at drawing. Right? So if you're going to paint something, you want to be thinking about where the light's coming from. In this case, if we look at the rendered version, we see the light's essentially coming down this way. Okay, so what that means is, without getting into too big of a dynamic range, like you wouldn't want the highlights on this grass to be up here. That'd be crazy. Generally, you want to work a limited dynamic range. So normally, if I'm going to a highlight, I'm just going to basically click just far enough away that I can actually get, you know, adjacent to the little circle there. And then that's going to give you a level of dynamic range that's going to look pretty good. Okay, that's not a specular highlight. It's just, and I guess in this case, I might make it a little more dynamic. But the thing is, especially if you're using Krita or some other paint program, you can always use curves to up the contrast, right? So then when you're going to go for some specular, you might go like this, and then this is where I'm going to squint again. I'm just squinting because I just want to just kind of feel where the light's hitting, kind of thing, right? More than, I'm not trying to draw blades of grass. Just kind of figure out how the light would just kind of touch it, right? And then of course that's going to create shadows as well. So you're always thinking about the actual volume of the stuff you're painting. So I guess that would be considered a tip. Okay, back up here. These paintings, by the way, are clearly going to evolve a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and hit the F key and just fill that in. Well, Val just walked by. Wonder if I want to take a break and go confer with her for a minute. Nah. I'll catch it next time. Okay, so here, this is going to be, I don't really see any reason to do anything except put a basic sky in there. So let's go ahead and crop this, because now we've got the colors in there. We can at least kind of know what we've got in terms of, let's render it and cut it into the show. So let's bop over here. So now this is going to be, yeah, so basically we need buildings here in the background, and I don't like the direction she's moving. I really think I want to move the guy. Yeah, from a perspective standpoint, this is a little off. It's fine up to here, and then she starts moving a little too far to the left. That frame right there is not working. So that's something I want to come back to. Here we need some grass in the background where the sky is. Here we could just go with straight sky. Okay, so you know, we're just kind of figuring this out as we go. So I'm going to hit the R key to sample this, and then what I think I'm going to do is just go like this so that I can then put in a fill operation and get some sense of the surrounding grass, and then crop it back off again so I see if it actually looks kind of sort of right, which it seems to. Okay, so now I'm going to take my brush and crank this back up to something bigger than what it is. Just paint that in there. And so the edges here, the border kind of between the dirt and the grass area is going to be a little bit iffy. That should actually be more of a shadow color. So alright, and then we can just kind of say if the grass is sort of sneaking into the sandy gravel or whatever, you would see it casting a little bit of a shadow, right? So -1, boom. And this, do I have, yeah, okay, I see what's going on. That elliptical dab thing, I want to make this truly a round brush, actually. I don't know if the direction filter has anything to do with that, but I'm going to take the elliptical dab ratio and make it 0 as well. There we go. That's just a straight old round brush. Okay, cool. For our purposes, this makes things a little simpler. Simpler, I say. Alright, back to color. Let's kind of work that in. I know, I'm back into Bob Ross mode now. Let's just draw happy little clouds, happy little clouds, happy little blades of grass. I would just really like those blades of grass. Now I'm really doing his voice wrong. Bob Ross was not really a Southerner. He was actually more of a, oh gosh, I don't know where he was from, but I think my neck of the woods. I grew up in Michigan. And, okay, so now what I want to do is just kind of play around with introducing
some variety.
It's a little bit too saturated there, fella. A little bit too saturated. Careful with your saturation. By the way, I want to use my big brush. Big brush. So, again, just trying to introduce some variety. A little bit of noise. A little bit of something. Again, squinting a little bit. Just a little bit of squinting. Don't know if I'm doing, you know, the greatest job ever, but I'm trying. Okay, and then in the background here, R key, B key. I wanna, now, to be accurate, I think I'm probably gonna blur this background, but we'll see. Okay, so now there is a bit of a problem. Let's okay, that's interesting. I better save my work. I just hit the 1 key. I meant to hit the tilde key, and I hit the 1 key, and when I hit the 1 key, this entire panel disappeared. What does that mean? I have literally no idea. Florida? Yeah, I might be. He might have been a Floridian. He might have been a Floridian. I just don't know. So I'm going to let this save. So yeah, I hit the 1 key, and then poof, my paint controls just disappeared. That's really strange. Very, very strange. What time is it? 11:43. It's getting to be... I'm approaching 2 hours. I may wrap it up here today. I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. Number one, I feel like I want to get away from this background painting for a bit to just get fresh eyes on it when I come back later, because I don't know that I'm doing a great job, and I can sense that when I get in that mode, things tend to slow down. So there's like that tug of war between just get away from it for a while and then revisit it versus, you know, engage with it, work with it, try things, right? There's a balance there. I'm kind of feeling like no, it's not one on the keypad. It's the one next to the tilde key. I went to hit the tilde key to solo the layer and I accidentally hit 1 or exclamation point. And poof. So that's a bit strange, but I think since I just saved my work, I'm just going to restart Tahoma and see what that does. I guess all this
Very, very fascinating stuff from earlier today.
probably is not that important for everyone to see now. All right, let's run Tahoma again. And then I think I'm actually going to make sure everything's, yep, everything's back to normal. And I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop so that I can just get a breather on this. Probably get some lunch too, because actually I did not eat breakfast this morning. I'm getting kind of hungry too. So I think with that, I'm going to render this and pop it into the show. Go over here. Just kind of take a look at how things are feeling. How they feeling. There's a shot we did yesterday. Boom. Feel like that rim light is a little strong. She definitely needs some clouds in the background. Maybe some buildings actually down here at the bottom, just peeking up. And we need buildings here too. For this shot, I'm a little conflicted. And this is what can happen. I mean, this shot went so well yesterday, but now that I see it colored with the background and the slightly off perspective is making me much less happy with this part of the shot. The scale feels quite wrong, too. The reality is that the old man is a giant. If she was walking that distance, this old man really should be much smaller and he should be down here. So the perspective's a little off. So there's things that really just need to be fixed. And so yeah, I feel like kind of we're at that point where I want to give this a bit of a breather. All right, so thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. Thanks, Tom, for your input as always. And with that, since we're approaching 2 hours anyway, I will say, as I often do, that there will